This pick for the mighty number 13 spot on my countdown focuses on making that sad face into a happy one. Also, both picks today are sequels. This is ML Miller Fright's Best in Horror Countdown, listing the best horror films released between October 1st, 2024 and September 30th, 2025. I won't tell you what today's pick is, but here's a clue.
Smile, you son of a bitch!
At number 13 is Smile 2. It was released on October 18th, 2024, and is streaming on Paramount Plus from Paramount Pictures. It's written and directed by Parker Finn. Pop star Sky Riley, played by Naomi Scott, had a rough go of it last year as her drug addiction led to the death of her actor boyfriend Paul, played by Jack Nicholson's son, Ray Nicholson. 1 year and an extended stay at rehab, and Sky is ready for a comeback. But when she hits up an old friend for Adderall, Sky becomes afflicted with a smile curse. A highly contagious curse that slowly drives you insane until you're forced to kill yourself in a violent way in front of someone new in order to pass the curse along to the next schlub. The original Smile was a highly effective and yet highly derivative curse thriller. It was also highly popular, so of course they rushed a sequel out 2 years later. Thankfully, a lot of what worked in the original is still present in Smile 2. There's the creepy-ass music made of backwards playing odd instruments, strange camera angles making one feel uneasy and off balance, the reoccurring uncanny look of the stretched smile across a dead-eyed face, and the frantic pace depicting a person slowly going from sane to insane in the span of about 2 hours. For some reason, many have said Smile 2 is even better than the first Smile film. I respectfully disagree, as the original was a film deeply enmeshed with the smile curse being a metaphor for trauma that follows one long after the horrifying event occurs. Upon witnessing a violent death, the cursed are haunted by that memory and driven to madness and eventually suicide. There is also a requirement to pass on that trauma to someone else, be it a loved one or even a therapist, as with the first Smile film. In that film, a therapist experiences an extreme reaction to a client. It gave transference and the lack of self-care a monstrous form. It is something that occurs often in the profession, and the deft metaphor explored in the first film really makes how devastating those concepts really are. Now, I'm not saying Smile 2 is bad, but instead of dealing with someone in the helping profession, it opens the film up to a broader audience by inflicting a pop star with the smile curse. It's fine that they do this, but the metaphor is lesser and feels much more like a cash grab than another profession that might experience extreme trauma like a cop or a fireman or an ER nurse. I feel like I can see the producers meeting now with a bunch of suits asking, "What do kids like these days?" And someone speaks up, "Well, my niece loves Taylor Swift." And then the suit says, "Bully idea. We can lure in the tween market by appealing to the mainstream love of pop music. Make a movie about that. We can have dance numbers and songs for the soundtrack and behind-the-scenes shots of the lead drinking lots and lots of water, and maybe put Jack Nicholson's son in it for the hell of it." Everyone then nods in unison, and the meeting ends, and the filming of Smile 2 begins. At least, that's how I see the whole thing going down. Now, appealing to a wide audience is not a bad thing. I prefer a film to go a bit deeper than that, but the deeper you get into something, the more likelihood the film is not going to resonate with the masses. Smile 2 feels like the first film, but with more appeal to that younger audience. It's a dumbed-down version of the trauma metaphor, and I understand those in the helping profession are not the only ones who deal with trauma. Still, it just feels much shallower than the first film, as it appeals to a more surface-level obsession with pop culture. Keeping with the recording industry idea, it's like Smile was the first breakout album that broke ground and felt like a discovery to listeners, while Smile 2 is the safe follow-up album meant to make money the band didn't make from the first deal. That said, the Smile franchise is not as original as most would realize. Cursed films can be traced all the way back to Universal classics like Wolfman and The Mummy, but it really began to pick up steam with the Cronenberg STD body horrors of the 70s and 80s like Shiver and Rabid, or the spreading contagion zombie movies of Romero like The Crazies, Dawn, and Day of the Dead. Even the contagious nightmare dreams Craven worked with in A Nightmare on Elm Street are worth mentioning. But it was the J-horror films like Ju-on, The Grudge, and Ringu that seemed to focus on the rise in tech and brought the Curse films back into the limelight in the aughts. After those films became Americanized, along came the massively influential It Follows to revive the Curse genre, which heavily influenced many modern horrors today, such as Talk to Me, The Boogeyman, and of course, Smile. If you saw my Smile review from a few years ago, you've heard this theory, but for the sake of this review and new readers, I don't mind revisiting it. With the rise of cancel culture, where someone says or does something and it makes them a pariah, an outcast, a monster in that community, if you will, I feel the new rise in cursed films over the years isn't a coincidence. Like a canceled person, something occurs and that person is immediately marked, experiencing symptoms that make them an outcast to their peer group. This often occurs in high school, which is why a lot of these films revolve around teens and appeals to teen viewers. Sadly, with Twitter being the equivalent of high school for adults, the same shit happens there too. But all you have to do with these films is replace curse with canceled, and you can see the metaphor pretty clearly. Of course, this is something humans have been doing since the Scarlet Letter, so while the cursed and outcasted subgenre of horror might be trendy as all get out these days, it's far, far, far from an original concept. All of that said, I liked Smile 2 quite a bit. In this one, Skye is canceled because she's filmed taking drugs, physically fighting with her boyfriend, assaulting a cameraman, and then being involved in a wreck causing her boyfriend's death. Skye's goal in the film is to stage a comeback, and she has a new album, a new hairdo, and a new management team consisting of her overprotective mother, played by Rosemarie DeWitt. Despite all of these attempts to remake herself, Skye's reliance on drugs drags her back into putting her career in danger. That same hindrance is what puts her directly in the headlights of the Smile curse. Naomi Scott is pretty darn phenomenal as Skye, our fading star staging a comeback. She goes through an emotional taffy machine, and though she has done some horrible things, Scott still manages to be relatable and likable. That's not an easy feat, and with her boppy little noggin in the middle of the screen for practically the whole film, Scott is crucial in making this movie work. I can't wait to see this actress again in more roles, as Scott killed it both on singing and dancing on stage and mentally cracking up behind the scenes. Much ado has been added to this film because it also stars Ray Nicholson, Jack Nicholson's son, but honestly he has a very small role, and what he does isn't that spectacular. He does have a scene where he does the shining grin, so there's that, but I was much more excited to see Kyle Gallner, who kicked major ass in Strange Darling. His role is small, but served as a nice connective tissue with the original film. There is plenty of crazy, trippy gore in Smile 2, especially later in the film when our starlet's cheese slides right off the Ritz. The Smile monster itself looks different from the original, suggesting everyone sees the beast differently from the last. There's also some very creative gore and jump scares, including a scene towards the end that felt a little too close to the ending of a far superior film, The Substance. Though there's no way that this film would have known about the similarities, as it seems both were filming at the same time. What I'm thankful for is that both Trap and Smile 2 have been released, and I don't have to see those two trailers cut the exact same way to appeal the Swifties in theaters anymore. Past the grab for mass appeal, I hope Smile 3, and you know there will be another one, given the reception to this sequel, goes to a little deeper subject matter to plumb for trauma like the aforementioned police, fireman, or nurse angle. But who am I kidding? The only bigger and better arena to go to is politics. So I imagine that'll be the next area where smiling will be a curse. The smiley face symbol shows up quite a bit in today's worth noting pick, on the Scarecrow sack-headed killer, the graffiti on the walls, the tattoos on various characters, and it even shows up in the final memorable scene. The Strangers Chapter 2 was miles better than Chapter 1. This alone is worth noting. The Strangers Chapter 2 was released on September 25th, 2025, and it might still be in theaters from Paramount, but it'll be showing up on demand very soon. It's directed by Renny Harlin and written by Alan R. Cohen and Alan Freedland. Continuing immediately after the events of Chapter 1, The Strangers Chapter 2 starts with Maya, played by Madeleine Pêche, waking up in a hospital on the mend after being stalked by 3 masked strangers while taking a vacation trip with her fiancé Ryan, played by Froy Gutierrez. She finds out Ryan was killed, and Sheriff Rotter, played by the notorious Richard Brakey, and his deputy Walters, played by Pedro Leandro, promise Maya they will catch the killer. Well, the film actually begins with a quick montage letting us know the identity of one of the strangers, but I'll get into that in a bit. Maya wakes up after a nightmare to see a message that her sister is on her way into town, and then hears a disturbance out in the hall. Unhooking herself from her vitals, Maya leaves her room to find that the strangers are in the hospital. This begins an endless cat-and-mouse chase that basically takes up the entire film as Maya escapes the hospital and is pursued through the surrounding Oregon woods by the strangers. I was going into The Strangers Chapter 2 with trepidation. I couldn't avoid seeing the amount of videos out there from the usual suspects who put their faces in the thumbnails with looks of exasperation, anger, and confusion. I do try to avoid watching reviews before writing mine, but the images alone told me enough of what I thought I was going to see. Or so I thought. It turns out I kind of liked The Strangers Chapter 2. Like many of you, I felt the first of the new series of Strangers movies was pointless, following the same roadmap the original Strangers film did, only with actors I didn't know, less of that thick claustrophobic atmosphere, and less of Brian Bertino's deft handling of soul-shearing suspense and taut tension. I guess that setup was necessary for us to get this second act, where things finally go off the well-worn path blazed by the original and new ground can be covered. Now, starting off immediately after the first one and having the protagonist wake up in a hospital is far from original. It's basically the same plot of the original Halloween 2. But while there are a few set pieces taking place in the hospital that were familiar, director Renny Harlin smartly takes the action out of the hospital and into the cold, rainy forest surrounding it. Here's the thing. The main criticism of the original was that it was unoriginal and didn't add anything to the overall mythos of the strangers. So what happens in the second one? It goes down a new path, and a bit more about the strangers themselves is revealed. Now, one might say that lifting the masks of the strangers is going against what makes them so darn scary in the first place, and to that I agree. There's nothing like an origin story of the masked killer or the enigmatic hero that kneecaps what is interesting about the character. Not everyone needs an origin. It's the same as explaining a joke. It's just not as effective if you have to dive into the mechanics of it all. That said, this peek behind the mask deals with the pinup girl stranger, as we get flashbacks to key moments in her development as a child. I won't reveal much more, other than these flashbacks are somewhat cliched at times, but because Nola Wallace, the little actress playing the young pinup girl, is so good at being bad, these scenes worked for me. It allowed for the movie, which is basically one big chase scene, to flip to a side plot now and then, when there needs to be a scene change or a period of time passed. Harlin really seemed to want to put just a skosh of backstory into the character, while still keeping things enigmatic and at times downright otherworldly. Now, I don't know if we need this origin-style take from the other 2 masked strangers, as this flashback seems to deal with the Scarecrow stranger as well, but for me, this was enough without straight-up telling me the origin step by step. But Harlin holds on to some of his cards. There's still Sheriff Rotter, I love that name by the way, lingering around in the background, dragging his heels on this investigation. And like introducing a gun in the first act and never firing it, things just wouldn't be right if Harlin doesn't use the devious Richard Brakey as some part of this masked stranger conspiracy. Or maybe Brakey is just a red herring. Only time will tell. I will say that I was never bored with The Strangers Chapter 2. One of the lost arts in slasher films is the cat and mouse chase scenes where the protagonist understands the threat and basically tries to use the environment and any tools around her to survive. This is a trope that has faded through the years, and I, for one, missed it. Having an entire film set on one girl running away from 3 masked strangers might seem redundant or light on plot, but Harlin has a strong handle on action, making each new challenge for Maya exciting and dangerous. There are a few scenes, such as the hospital curtain scene and the horse stables scene, that felt redundant, but for the most part, Harlin keeps the challenges varied. There's an especially unique and strange sequence that I won't reveal, but it adds an odd little detail to the rural nature of the setting and the origin of the strangers. It involves a CGI animal that actually looked pretty good and reminded me of the bear attack sequence in The Revenant. Now, it wasn't as brutal or as extensive as that, but still, it was something I hadn't seen before, and that was surely appreciated. It also gave us a chance to see how determined and resourceful our little heroine Maya truly is. There is a bit of plot armor in Maya's character, simply because she most likely would factor into the 3rd installment where her fate is less than safe. Still, even though I knew she wasn't going to get cacked, Madeleine Petsch does a great job of making these threats feel threatening, while also taking a whole lot of wear and tear herself along the way. She's a good little actress, even though there are long sequences without dialogue, as she has to just keep quiet, tear up, and hide from the strangers over and over again. Still, Harlin manages to work in a gratuitous scene of her in her undies, which is definitely appreciated by this reviewer. It's going to boil down to what you want in a slasher film, whether or not this new chapter in Renny Harlin's The Strangers saga is going to be for you. Personally, I like the thrill of the hunt, and while I do like a good tense scare and a lot of mystery, which this film has copious amounts of as well, I found The Strangers Chapter 2 to be thrilling from beginning to end. It's the middle chapter of this series, with the next one wrapping up the whole thing soon. I'm hoping that the 3rd installment is released sooner rather than later, kind of like how the next 28 Years Later film is due out only 6 months after its first trilogy installment. Final verdict, I liked The Strangers Chapter 2. I didn't think I was going to, but Harlin and company really delivered the goods with this one and almost redeemed itself after that unoriginal first chapter. As always, feel free to agree, disagree, or how about you play along at home and give me your own picks for your own favorite movies of the year. It's October, so let's talk horror. Come back tomorrow for the next level in the Best in Horror Countdown. Be sure to hit all of those pertinent bells and whistles down below, and you'll never miss a post. Happy Halloween, folks.